Hey guys, Rudi back with part 2 of the week 5 tutorial solution video for CSSE1001 and 7030. The first section was all about debugging. If you want to hit that one up, I will chuck a link in the description. But otherwise, this part of the tutorial is all about using files and playing around with strings and lists a bit. Okay, so we want to write a function, find functions. Let's just do this as I go. That takes a name of a file containing Python code and finds the name of each function defined in that file. Okay, you might like to use the sample file week 5 functions. Now I just got that before, so we can see it's just got a couple of functions: def square, def add, print add, def get 0, and some sort of red herrings down the bottom here: defrosted, a comment, different kind of comment, or a string, I suppose that is. Okay, so we want to write a function that goes through that file, or any file, I suppose, and finds all the things that have all the lines that are functions. Okay, it should be written. Those outputs should be written to a file called functions.txt. Okay, with one function name per line. You may like to use. Okay, cool. I already went through that. Cool. So we should get back square, add, and get. Okay, because square, add, get, because everything else is taken. This is not a function. This is not a function. Nothing else is functions. Cool. So let's start off with that. How do we access a file, right? How do we start reading files? Now, you will have seen a couple of ways of doing this, hopefully, if you've read the course notes or anything. And one of the first ways is just to use the open command, right? So we can go f equals open. The first thing we give it is a file name. And then the second thing we give it is a mode, right? Now, if we want to be opening up this file name to sort of have a read of its contents, and we don't really want to edit the contents at all, then we can just put an R in here, right? And indeed, I should probably make sure that this is my my fread function, my file read function. Okay. And so this R here means we're opening it in read mode. We're only looking at the content, and we can't actually, accidentally make any changes to our files, because we've got to be really careful with that, right? Because if we accidentally, overwrite a file, then it's gone, right? That file's gone. We're not going to be able to get it back easily. So that's why when we're opening stuff in read mode, it's sort of a safety thing, where we're looking, we're not touching. And so the other part of that, the other corresponding part is if we open a file, we want to close it as well. Okay, we don't want to leave sort of loose ends lying around, because as long as our program's running, if we've opened a file, we have access to that file, right? That means other programs can't access that file, and anything we do to that file is actually sort of live editing that file. So you always want to close the file when you're done with it, as a sort of another safety concern, right? Because basically handling files is all about safety. We want to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot and delete half our files. Okay. So this is one way of doing it. Okay, now there's actually, in some of the more recent Python versions, there's something that's a bit more modern and a bit more user-friendly, and I'm actually going to show you that, guys, now, right? And that's using the with command. Okay, so what we can do instead is with fread as open file name R. Okay, and so what this bit of code does here, right, is anything inside this block and down, right, from here, we'll have fread as an open file name. Okay, so we can open it and close it manually ourselves, the old-fashioned way, or we can do all the code we need to use that file in this block here, and the moment we get outside of the block at the end, right, Python will automatically close that file. Okay, so this is how I'm going to do my file stuff, because honestly, it's just a better way. It's just a better way. The open and close is good. It's good to know what they do, and you should certainly know what they do, just from Python perspective. But when you actually write code, you probably want to use this with statement. Okay, so with our file open, right, at this point here, we want to start reading our file. Okay, and now whenever you're reading a file in Python, one of the easiest ways you can do it is with a for loop. Okay, because a file is actually an iterable object in Python, or a file stream, and we can read over it line by line as our iterator. Okay, so I could do something like this for I in file, and I would be the line each time, but I'm actually going to help myself a bit with some better variable names. So it's a bit more easy to understand what's happening here, right? So for line in file, and let's just straight up start by printing this line. Okay, and I'm gonna get rid of that. So find functions. Can't assign to function call. Oh my, what have I done? I've totally done this backwards, haven't I? Oh my gosh, I have. Excuse me. Whoops, with open file name as fread. My bad. Right, so remember, it's the thing you're doing here and then what variable you're assigning it to. Whoops. Okay, here we go. Find functions. And now what was the name of that function that we grabbed from the website? week5functions.py. Okay, I'm going to take your word for it, tutorial website. Name file is not defined. And of course it isn't. For line in file, what is file? I called my guy fread. For line in fread. Okay, right? And if we can see here, we can see that it's actually just gone and printed the line, right? It's gone and printed every single line, same as was in this file here. Okay, you'll notice it's added extra spaces everywhere, extra lines, and that's just because print always adds a new line afterwards, right? So if there's already a new line here and we print it, it's gonna sort of double space everything. But it is indeed printing every line. Okay, now what we want to do is not that, right? We want to print. Oh, we want to write out, I suppose, every line that has a function with it. Okay, so before we print these guys, I guess we want to be a bit more selective about what we're printing, right? We want to be if, you know, lines, what starts with? I suppose if line is a function def. Okay, now in terms of what defines a function, well, we've done one up here, right? And it's the def keyword. So we want a line that starts with def. Okay, so there's a couple of ways we could do this. If line, and we want the first three characters, right? So we could actually use our string slice notation from the previous view, and we could go previous view toots, if line 03, well, if that's equal to def, print line. Okay, so let's see how that goes. Okay, def square, def add, def 0, defrosted. Okay, so that's not quite right. Just to, I guess if you needed a brief brush up on this, if I have a line A, B, C, D, E, F, or whatever, and I use 0 to 3, this will take everything from the 0th character up into, but not including the 3rd character. So in this case, it'd be 0, 1, 2, which corresponds to A, B, C in our string. Okay, so by checking each line, the first 3 characters, checking for defs, we can do that way. Now, this called the defrosted guy, right? So I guess really the function line is defined by def and then a space. So if I check the first 4 characters now for def and then a space, let's see what we get printing out. And there's our 3 functions. Okay? Now, that is one way of doing it. There actually is a bit more of an elegant solution in Python, right? And that's actually using the string method. There is literally a string method that lets you know if a string starts with something. Okay? And it's actually just straight up called starts with, if I can spell that right. Starts with. Okay? Return true if s starts with the specified prefix. So instead of being all this clunky indexing, I can go if line starts with, what was it, def and then a space? Print that line. Okay, and we can see that this is super readable and gives us the same results, right? It's giving us those lines starting with it. Now, we didn't just want to print those lines, right? We actually wanted to write those lines to the file functions.txt. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is, I suppose we could try and open 2 of these files at once. Right, one for reading, one for writing, and then I'd have to sort of nest these with blocks, right? And I don't particularly like that. So instead of that, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new. I'm going to put all of the lines I want into list, and then I'm going to write them all. So I sort of have a reading section here, and a writing section afterwards. So read file, and then remember that we close here. After that, we're going to have the write file. Okay, so I guess to get this list going, I'm going to need a list, functions, and we're going to start off with an empty list, and then instead of printing this line each time, we're going to append that into our list. Functions.append line. Okay, and so if we print out our functions list at this point here, we should just have those 3 lines we had before. Yep, see, there we go. Def square, def add, def get. Okay, cool. You'll notice that it's got this \n character in there. So that's the new line character. So notice how when we printed it before, we had this new line here, right? And that's just because the \n is in that file. Okay, and that's actually what's telling that file to separate these things. There's like an invisible \n here, and so that's how Python knows, or any like, you know, Notepad, how anything that opens this file would be like, oh cool, put a new line there, put a new line there. There's just a little hidden character. But when we put it in the list, it pops up, and so we can see it. Okay, now I suppose I want to do the actual writing part now. So we are going to write this all to functions.txt. So same thing, right, with open file name. Now let's think about our mode this time, right? I do want to write to a file, right? I want to completely overwrite this new file, and I don't want to call it file name. Whoops, I want to call it functions.txt. Okay, now if I want to write to this file, I actually want to put it in write mode. Okay, now be very careful with this, as like I was saying before, this will completely wipe the file. If you have a functions.txt file somewhere in the same directory where you're saving it, it will overwrite it. Okay, the other thing it'll do is if you don't have a functions.txt file, it'll make one for you. So that's nice, and that's what we're going to use here. Now, to write each line into that file, it's actually a really simple, nifty way we can do this, and that's just with a file or a file stream method called write lines. Okay, and if we give this a list or some sort of collection, excuse me, Python will actually, and if we give this a list or some sort of collection, Python will actually write all of these lines to a file for us. Okay, so we are going to give it our functions list. Okay, and then hopefully when we're done afterwards, this will have written all the functions into our file. Okay, so let's run this. Let's run our function. And okay, cool. So we can't actually see anything, right? Because we're not printing anything. But hopefully, if I go to, where are we? CSSE1001, week 5, functions.txt, you can see we've got this text document here. And let's just open it. And there we go. Def square, def add, def get 0. Okay. Let's just get the website back up. And that's exactly what our file's supposed to look like. So awesome. We've gone and done that. Okay. Modify this function to instead return a list of tuples of the form line num args, where name is the name of a function, args is a tuple of parameters, and line num is the line number containing the function definition. Find functions. Okay, so I guess we're done with the file writing part of the tut. So I'm gonna close this guy down. Okay, and I guess we won't need this guy anymore. So I'm gonna comment that guy. Let's move him down out of the way, and we'll go back to modifying this one. So instead, we want to return a list of tuples. Okay, so I guess we are going to need our list. Okay, we're going to want to be returning our list at the end, but we're probably going to have to do a bit more with it, right? So we need the line number, the name, and the arguments. Now, in terms of getting the line number, well, let's think. There's a couple of ways we could do this, right? We need to know what number this line is associated with. So, I mean, one way we could start doing that is we could just start our line counter. Let's call that something a bit better. So what line are we on? Line num. Going to start it on 1. And, you know, every time we read a line, we could increase it by 1, right? So, you know, it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 3, right? And let's not make the same mistake from the first part of the tut, right? And put this line plus equals 1 inside the if statement. We don't want it in there, right? Regardless of what happens, we know the line counter needs to increase. So that's one way we could do it. A slightly cooler way, and you know I'm all about that coolness, is using a method known as enum. Okay, so just to give you a quick show of what this does in the shell, if I have a variable that is, say, a list or a string, you know, it doesn't really matter. Okay, x equals that, and now using the enum function for excuse me, for var in enum. Oh, sorry, enumerate. It is in Python. Yep. You'll often hear that referred to as enum. Let's just print out that var and see what we're getting here. 0a, 1b, 2c, 3d. So enumerate actually takes a list and splits it up into all the things that the list would normally loop over, right? So if we went for var in x, we would get a, b, c, d. And it instead returns a pair of things with an index number, right? So this was the first thing, second thing, third thing, fourth thing. Okay? So if we are looping over something and we also want to know its index, right? We can use enumerate. This actually is pretty useful on your first assignment. Enumerate. Okay, so now, in theory, we have access to our line number as well when we are doing our enumeration. Our loop over our file. Now, you can actually take this even further, right? Since we know we're going to be getting back two things here, we can actually incorporate Python's tuple unpacking as well. Okay, so if I want two things back, A and B, I can actually get both of them back in one go like that, and then I can go in and print A and B. Okay, and you can see that A contains the first thing, and B is containing the second thing. So instead of just putting a line here and having to deal with what's line and what's not line, when I enumerate fread, I'm actually going to assign two things. So the first thing that comes back is the line number, or the index. So I'm actually going to chuck I. Okay, so this I in here is going to be our, well, it's not quite our line number, right? I suppose it's one less than our line number, because it's going to start at 0. Okay, and just to see what's happening here, I'm going to quickly comment this out for a sec. And let's just print I and line of our file. What was I running before? Find functions. Okay, let's hit that. Okay, so you can see it's printing out each line number and then the line. Well, I suppose it's one less than the line number and then the line. Okay, so that's how enumerate's working. Okay, sweet. So, well, how can we use that? What did we want? We wanted to print out a tuple that contained the line number, the name, and the arguments. Okay, so let's just undo this print for now, and let's uncomment out this stuff, because we still only want the, we still only want the lines that start with def, right? So we're going to keep this, but I suppose before we append, we're going to have to do a bit more work. But we can safely say, I suppose, that line number is going to be I plus 1. Okay, because we're going to start at 0 and count upwards, and we would want our line numbers to start counting at 1, right? That's just the sort of common way people read it. So I suppose next thing we've got here is name, where name is the name of a function. Okay, well, we need to get the name of our function, right? So if we look at each line, the name is the thing in between the space and the def and the first set of brackets we've got here. Now, when we're slicing up a string, there are a couple of different methods we can use to get around that. Now, there's split, there's partition, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. But my personal one that I like to use a lot is definitely partition. You probably would have seen this in some of the MyPys. But what partition does, if I bring up the shell, is if we have some variable, hello world, okay, and we use dot partition, we tell it what character we want to split it over. So let's say I want to split over the space, okay, and it returns three things: everything before the first space, the space, and everything after the space. Okay, so if I've got my line here and I want to get out the name, we could use line.partition. Oops, spelled that wrong. Okay, and I want I want to chop off the space and the bracket. So I'm actually going to have to do two partitions here. But if I go by space, then I know that this second part definitely contains my function name, right? If I'm splitting over this line, say. So I'm going to partition over the space. Okay? Now I could put one thing here again, and they would assign the entire tuple to these three things. But once again, I can use the tuple unpacking trick, and it'll actually separate out those three things for me. Okay, so I've got the, everything before, so that the definition, definition. So I've got everything before, right? So I've got the definition, and then I have the space, and then I have, the name. Well, it's not really quite the name, but after or something. I'll try and think of a better name. But if we think about it, I really don't care about this guy or this guy. So a common pattern you'll see in Python is just to give them really basic variable names, for like an underscore. Okay, because I'm never going to use these two parts again. Why should I give them meaningful variable names, right? I only care about this guy here, which I think I'm actually going to call, I guess, line, because it's most of the line. Yeah, let's go with that. And so just to show you what's happening here, let's then also print out that line guy. And I'm just going to comment this line again. Okay, so notice how we've managed to strip everything from that def and that space, right? We've got everything on the right side of that space. Okay, now we just want to partition again, and we want to get everything on the, everything from the start, I suppose, up until the first open bracket. Okay, so let's just partition this guy up again. Now the start is going to be our name, right? Then we're going to have that open bracket. Now I don't really care about that open bracket character, so I'm going to give it a dud variable. And then what's afterwards is mostly our parameters, right? So I'm going to call it a params, okay? And then we're going to partition. Oh, what do I always make that typo. I'm going to try and do the whole thing in one go. Partition. There we go. Over open bracket. Okay, and now let's see what's in our name and our params, I suppose. All right, let's check out both. Okay, so our name is square add get 0, so that's working. And our params is this and this. Okay, cool. But it looks like at this point, basically, we've got our name working. Okay, so we've got our line number done here. We've got our name part down here, and now let's get our parameters section part working here. Okay, line, name. Now let's do the parameters part. Now the parameters part's going to be a little bit more difficult, because what did they want? They wanted a, where was it? Args. Okay, well, I guess we'll just call it args. Parameters, same thing, really. Okay, is a tuple of parameter names, to the function. Okay, so we need a tuple of x and y, or x or none, I guess, if we've got nothing there. Now, what we were getting back was a sort of, we're kind of getting a bit of a list here, right? But we don't really care about this last part. So I'm going to partition one more time to ensure I get parameters, right? So I want parameters to be everything before the first close bracket we find. So I'm going to set args to be the first part. I'm going to have that dud bracket. And once again, I don't care about what happens after the bracket, right? Because that's going to be this part here. So I'm also going to give that a dud variable. And we are going to args.partition over close bracket now. Okay, let's run that, update everything. String object has, oh, I did it again. Every time. So what do we got there? Let's try running that again. Square x, add xy, get 0, nothing. Okay, so we can see that our args guy is pretty much what we need, right? We just need to put it into a tuple. Okay, so one sort of easy way we can do that is we can actually try splitting up the string based on where the commas are. Okay, So if we have a string and we want to split it up by commas, oh, whoops, I should have assigned that to a variable. Okay, and we want to split it up by commas, we can actually use the split method, right? We tell it exactly what we want to split by, and it gives us back a list of all the splitted up things, I suppose is what you'd say, right? And you can split over anything, right? If I split over the letter B here, for instance, it gives me A, comma, and then comma CD, right? Because it's split us over everything. And notice it doesn't include the B either, right? So if I do a comma split over my args, I should get a list of all the args. Okay, so let's set args now to be args.split over commas. Okay, and now let's see what these args are each time. Where's my function gone? There we are. Cool, so here's a list x, a list x space y, and empty. Okay, now this space I guess we got to be careful of because we don't want that space in there. But I guess we'll deal with that when we go on, right? Because what we want to do now is we wanted a tuple of all the, sorry, we wanted a list of tuples for all the arguments. Was it? I don't actually remember exactly what it was. Is it tuple of parameter names, and line number is the line number containing. Okay, so we do want a tuple, I think. I think we want a tuple. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, I suppose what I'm actually going to do is I'm probably going to make a list first, and then we're going to go from there. So let's start with that, right? Because we've got our split here. We've got our list args, and we just need to get rid of those spaces. Okay, so let's I guess let's start off by making something else here, I suppose. Args. Oh geez, I don't even know what to call this guy now. Args list. Okay, we're going to start off with a blank list. And basically, we need to access each individual arg, right? Inside the arguments thing, because we want to get rid of these spaces, right? So we need to access the individual ones. So I suppose for arg in args. And all we want to do is we want to chuck them back into a list, right? So we want to append our arg back into the list, right? But obviously these two lines do absolutely nothing. But what we want to make sure is that when we put the arg back in, it's got no white space. So hopefully you remember from your assignments, or if you haven't, that we can actually just strip all white space by using strip. Okay, so another example, if I've got a bunch of spaces, right, and then a bunch of spaces, even new line characters, right? And I go x.strip, gets rid of all the spaces on both sides. Okay, so by doing this now, my args list should contain hopefully more or less what we're after here. Find functions, and yeah, there we go, right? We can see that the spaces have gone. And obviously when there weren't any spaces, strip doesn't do anything, right? It sort of just keeps it exactly how it is because it's getting rid of the space. Okay, so what did we want? We wanted to give back a list of tuples of these three things happening. Okay, so let's, I guess, go back to appending all that stuff into our functions. What did we want in the function? We wanted to append a tuple, okay, that was the line number, name, and arguments. So line number, name, and args list. Okay, I guess I can call this, I don't know, lnum. Yeah, let's go lnum, just so I can try and fit this all on one screen. Line number, names, args list. Okay, and when we're done with that, we want to return that list of all the juicy things that we put inside our functions there. And there is our list. 1 square x. Let's move this over to the right. Oh, where'd it go? Okay, there we go. 1 square x. 5 add xy. 14 get 0. Okay, so we can see our numbers here are a bit off. Now, I imagine that is probably because we're adding in extra lines. Oh, actually, let's just see. Maybe I added in some lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, okay, no, I guess I've just added in some extra enters when I've opened this or something. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm not going to worry about that then. I thought maybe we had something else extra going on. But it looks like I've just got a slightly different file to what this thing's expecting. So there is a bit of a challenge here, right? And I would encourage you guys to actually go through and attempt this. I'm running a bit over time, and it's probably not super more interesting to everyone else. So I'm going to let you guys go and do this one ahead on your own. But you can go ahead using partition and just have a good read of all these things in here. All right, and just have a bit of a go at it. Okay, but the main thing here, I guess, to take away from our string handling chute is using methods like strip, split, and partition to sort of access the different parts of the string, and using either a with block, right? We call this it's to do with using Python context managers, they're called, but we're either using a with block for opening a file, or using fopen and f.close, right? You need to be aware of both methods. So the other one is using the f takes on open file name in whatever mode, and then making sure that afterwards we definitely close it. Okay, but using the with block handles that all for you, so it's a bit of a better solution. Okay, so as always, if you've got any questions about either of these videos, part 1 or part 2, either chuck them in the comments or feel free to make a post on Piazza as well. You can tag me in them if you want, but we'll definitely make sure we get to those, get to answering those as soon as possible. And otherwise, I will catch you guys in next week's solution video.